Working the night shift in a morgue was never something that bothered me. When I first started, I felt secure, almost indifferent to the environment. After all, bodies are just lifeless remnants, nothing more. But things changed over the years, especially after a few events that made me question reality, and even my own sanity. It all began on an ordinary night. It was almost 2 a.m. when I received the body of a middle-aged man. There was no identification, and he was recorded as an unknown. Just another nameless man among us. The medical report stated he had been found in a distant neighborhood, collapsed in the street with no visible signs of physical violence. It seemed like another case of cardiac arrest. We were used to such cases. The city is large, and many people live isolated without friends or family nearby. Still, when I received that body, I felt an inexplicable discomfort. As I prepared the corpse for storage, I noticed a peculiar expression on his face. It was something between fear and bewilderment. Even with rigor mortis, his face still seemed to reflect the last emotion that man had felt. I admit it disturbed me, but as usual, I tried to ignore it. I continued my work and closed the compartment where he would remain until identified or collected by the authorities. I returned to my desk and continued with the paperwork, trying to forget about that detail. The first strange occurrence happened about an hour later. While filling out reports, I heard a metallic noise coming from the storage room. It sounded as if someone had opened and closed one of the compartments. At first, I thought it might have been an issue with the ventilation system, since on some nights the cold and humidity in the building made the metal creak. But when I got up to check, I found everything in order. The compartment containing the unknown man was still locked, as were the others. Yet, the unease persisted. The next night, while I was in the office, I heard footsteps. They weren't heavy steps, but enough to echo through the empty hallways of the morgue. I'd been alone for hours, so knowing no one should be there, I decided to investigate. I carefully followed the sound, holding a flashlight since the main lights were off to conserve energy. The footsteps echoed, fluctuating, as if someone were walking between the compartments. When I reached the storage room, I saw in the reflection of my flashlight that the compartment with the unknown man was slightly ajar. That didn't make sense. I was sure I had closed it properly. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept approaching and pushed the compartment back into place, locking it again. I decided to check the locking system in the morning, suspecting it might have malfunctioned. I returned to the office, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. A few days later, something even stranger happened. Another technician, Matthew, was assigned to work the night shift with me. He had heard the rumors about strange sounds in the morgue, but didn't believe them. "The dead don't walk. It's all in our heads," he would often say. We were laughing about it when suddenly the same metallic sound echoed from the storage room. Matthew stopped laughing and we exchanged a silent glance. He suggested we check it together. When we entered the room, we noticed again that the compartment with the unknown man was slightly open. This time, we decided to examine the body to see if anything was out of place. As we pulled out the drawer and opened the bag that covered him, we saw that the body had shifted slightly as if someone had pushed or moved it. That left us both puzzled. Matthew seemed nervous, but made a joke to cover up her discomfort. After checking everything, we closed the compartment and went back to the office. But at that moment, I knew something wasn't right. Over the following weeks, the situation worsened. The noises became more frequent, and the compartments began to appear ajar more often. A strange odor began to fill the room, a scent that wasn't the usual preservation chemicals or the common smell of bodies. It was something else, a mix of dampness and a faint sweet smell that seemed to be lingering in the air. Eventually, even Matthew, once a staunch skeptic, started to fear the night shifts at the morgue. One night, when we were alone again, we heard a louder noise, like a thud, coming from the storage room. This time, we both hesitated. The sound didn't seem metallic. It was denser, almost as if something heavy had fallen to the ground. Armed with our flashlights, we made our way to the room and slowly opened the door. The light flickered on the walls. That's when we saw it. One of the bodies was out of the compartment, lying on the floor, turned on its side as though it had fallen while trying to crawl out. The shock was so great that Matthew stepped back, knocking over her flashlight. I froze, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. When we finally reacted, we placed the body back and shut the compartment, locking it as tightly as we could. We sat in silence for a few minutes, our breathing echoing in the empty room. Returning to the office, we agreed not to tell our superiors. We feared they wouldn't believe us, or worse, think we were irresponsible or mentally unstable. Weeks passed, but my sense of security was never the same. Every time I heard a sound, even the slightest one, a chill ran down my spine. Those noises had become part of the morgue's routine, like a silent presence that was watching us. Matthew, who had once laughed off such things, began to avoid making jokes. We both knew something was wrong, but no one dared to name it. Then one night, I received a call from the morgue administration. They informed me that the body of the unknown man was to be transferred to a forensic lab in another city. According to them, the police had identified the man and uncovered a disturbing detail. He was wanted for a series of violent crimes, and his victims shared a strange characteristic. They had all been found with expressions of extreme fear, something the experts said was highly unusual. When I heard this, my mind flashed back to that first night when I saw the expression on that man's face. It felt like a warning, a silent scream. I spent the next night thinking about it, unable to shake the connection between the man's story and the strange occurrences at the morgue, though I couldn't explain how. The idea that someone so violent and disturbing had been in that room, even after death, made me even more uncomfortable. The following morning, when the truck arrived to take the body, I felt a relief I hadn't known I needed. The unknown man was finally leaving, and with him, I hoped the morgue would return to normal. Matthew and I stood in the reception area, watching the body being loaded into the truck. But the moment the door of the truck closed, I heard that familiar metallic sound echoing behind us, coming from the storage room. I glanced at Matthew. He looked as pale as I felt. Without saying a word, we returned to the office, determined to pretend nothing had happened. Little did we know that was just the beginning of a series of nights when the morgue seemed to come alive after the unknown man's body was removed. Matthew and I thought that with time, everything would return to normal. The following weeks were relatively quiet, but the feeling of being watched never fully disappeared. In fact, it seemed to intensify, as if the morgue still carried the presence of that man, even after his departure. A few months later, on a quiet night, we received a new batch of bodies. 3 of them with no identification. 2 men and a woman. The woman had been found in an alley, with signs of violence on her face and arms. The lack of identification suggested she was likely homeless. Even for a morgue, there was a strange tension in the air when she arrived. There was something in her expression that unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the resemblance to the unknown man. That same frozen expression of terror on her face. The days passed uneventfully until one night, when I was alone in the storage room organizing reports. Matthew had taken the night off, and the new security guard, Carlos, was on patrol outside. Around 3 a.m., I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, which was unusual since the doors and windows were tightly locked. Yet that night, a cold breeze seemed to invade the room, carrying with it a dense smell, a mix of acid and something faintly sweet. That's when I heard a nearly inaudible sound, like scratching, as though something was dragging against the metal surface of one of the compartments. I remembered the incidents with the unknown man, but I tried to stay calm. I reasoned it could be a loose part, or even a vibration from the ventilation system, but I decided to check. As I approached the compartment with the unknown woman, I noticed the door was slightly open, revealing a small slit of darkness. Hesitating, I slowly pulled open the compartment to discover that the bag covering the body had been torn. The woman was turned to the side, her eyes half closed, her mouth slightly open, as though she had tried to say something before she died. My heart raced, and I felt cold sweat trickle down my neck. I quickly closed the compartment and returned to the office, trying to calm myself. The next night, during Carlos's patrol, he mentioned something that made me even more uneasy. Sometimes I feel like someone's walking behind me in the hallway. When I look back, there's nothing there, but it's like the presence is still in the air, you know? He said nervously. I did my best to hide my discomfort, but I knew something was wrong. Things continued in this strange manner, with odd noises and sensations of invisible presences. Then one fateful night, I was alone in the office, filling out reports, when I heard the unmistakable thud from the storage room. It was a dense sound, as though something heavy had fallen. My heart raced, but I knew I had to check. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way to the room. When I opened the door, I found the compartment with the unknown woman completely open. Her body was out of the drawer, lying on the floor, her face turned toward the door, eyes wide open, fixed on me. The look of terror on her face was even more intense than when I had last seen her. I stepped back, trying to control the panic, but I couldn't look away. That's when I saw something that made me question my sanity completely. On the floor beside the body were scratch marks, as though she had truly tried to crawl out of the compartment in a desperate attempt to escape. Deep, unmistakable scratch marks that led toward the door. Terrified, I locked the morgue and called Matthew. I didn't want to face this alone. He arrived about half an hour later, clearly shaken by the call but willing to help. We went back to the room together, and when he saw the marks on the floor and the body on the ground, he muttered, "This isn't possible. She was dead. There's no way she could have gotten out by herself." Unsure of what to think, we spent the rest of the night cleaning the area and trying, in vain, to ignore the fear that had taken hold of us. We put the woman's body back in the compartment and locked everything again. But at that moment, one certainty haunted me. The morgue wasn't just a storage place for bodies. It seemed to accumulate something more, like it absorbed the emotions, the traumas, the suffering of the people kept there. It was as if the stories, the secrets, and the fears of those who passed through it remained, transforming the place into a prison of dark energy. In the days that followed, Matthew requested a transfer, and I was reassigned to different shifts, away from the morgue. Yet what we experienced there still haunts my mind. Sometimes in the silence of the night, I hear those metallic sounds echoing in my memory, and I can't help but think of the terrified gaze of the unknown woman, as though she was trying to tell me something I never understood, and perhaps it's better that way.